Support for The Middle comes from you and from the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, preserving the story of the citizen soldier and connecting military history to the decisions citizens and leaders face today. Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Our DJ Tolliver is here as well. And Tolliver, we are talking about failure this hour. And I'm going to start us off by admitting to a failure that's very easy for me to talk about because it doesn't matter to my life at all at this point, which is that when I was a sophomore in high school, I failed a geometry test. I actually got a 14 out of 100, which wouldn't even have been good if it was out of 20.
If it makes you feel any better, I'm 40, and I asked my friend what country Panama was in the other day.
Oh, Tolliver. Oh, man. Well, of course, it is more difficult to accept failure when it's something you really care about. So is there something, Tolliver, that you failed at that you're willing to talk about?
Well, now I'm, a famous DJ on this show, but in my early 20s, I was like, I'm going to be the next Usher. I was so sure I was going to be Justin Timberlake and all that. So I wouldn't consider that a failure, but, something like that.
I wanted to be David Letterman, and actually now I'm happy I'm not because it looks like late night talk shows are not really doing that well at the moment. But the thing is that everyone has experienced failure or will experience failure, whether in their personal or professional lives. But if you listen to very smart people, they say that failure can actually be a good thing. Winston Churchill said, quote, "Success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm." Confucius said, "Our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising every time we fail." And of course, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger" by Kelly Clarkson. So this hour, we want to know how you came back from failure. We're going to get to your calls in a moment at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. But first, last week we talked about the Epstein files and whether the revelations will impact your vote this November. Here are some of the voicemails we got.
My name's Michael Hauser. I'm coming from Kansas City, Kansas, and it is very important to me that the Epstein files are on the public consciousness. The fact that the leaders of our world can get away with such blatant abuse of human rights and dignities is disgusting, and I think we should all be far more concerned than it seems that we are.
Sergio Perez, calling from Los Angeles, California. These Epstein files are nothing new, and I don't think it should be branded as a Republican thing because, both sides are guilty. Everyone's at fault, and I think people need to do better at voting versus what social media tells them to vote for.
Hi, it's Mary from Grand Junction, Colorado. The Epstein files are a big concern, and I don't want it to get dropped. Other countries are holding their political officials accountable. I don't know how you get to the bottom of the truth of this, but it does matter because obviously they know it matters because there's a lot of hiding in all of it.
Well, as always, you can hear that full show on our podcast. Just subscribe to The Middle wherever you listen to podcasts. So now to our topic this hour. How have you come back from failure? Tolliver, how can people reach us?
You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or comment on our live stream on YouTube.
Joining me this hour, Amy Edmondson, author and leadership expert. She's also the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at the Harvard Business School. Amy, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
And Daniel Pink is with us as well, author of several best-selling books, including The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. Daniel, welcome to you.
Thank you.
Well, and as I was preparing for this, I will say, Amy, that one thing that came up again and again about failure was the word inevitable. Is failure an inevitable part of life?
Absolutely. If you don't fail, you could never learn anything new or learn how to do anything new. You couldn't ride a bicycle, you couldn't walk, you couldn't do geometry.
Back to the geometry. But is it then the purpose, Daniel, to try to avoid failure? Is that the right approach?
It depends. It depends on what kind of failure. I mean, Amy has her own taxonomy of failure. It depends on what kind of failure. So there are failures, there are mistakes that we make that are stupid that we should try to avoid. But there are other things where actually failure is an option because it suggests that we're doing something at the edge of our competence. It's something that's worthwhile, and if we end up not succeeding, then we can extract lessons from that.
Do we have to admit failure, Amy? Is that something you should do when you fail? There's also, I would say, the Trump model of never admitting failure, even when you do things that end up being a screw up.
Well, there's really two potential audiences for admitting failure. One is to yourself, and the other is to other people. And I think we have to admit failure to both, but it does start with admitting it to yourself. If you develop a habit to just always look away or always assume someone else did it or it was outside your control, it was someone else's fault, you didn't fail, the situation was a bad setup, then you're setting yourself up not to learn. So I think it's absolutely important to admit failure, to take a good look at it and figure out what it's teaching you.
To take a good look at it. But Daniel Pink, I've seen that you've said ignoring regret is a really bad idea because they're not going to learn. These are leaders. But wallowing in it is in some ways an even worse idea because it hobbles you. Explain that.
Well, I mean, so I've done some studies of regret, which is the emotion we feel in the face of the action, often the action of failure, the action of mistakes. And what we have to do is just triangulate. I mean, some people in the face of this terrible emotion will ignore their regret, plug their fingers in their ears, blah, 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 I don't hear anything. Bad idea. Other people get captured by it and wallow in it. That's also a bad idea. What we should do is a third way, which is actually look it in the eye, interrogate it. Try to learn from it. I think of regret, the emotion of regret, a little bit like a knock at the door, right? And it's a somewhat menacing knock at the door. So you can do two things. You can say, I don't hear anything, even though someone's knocking at the frickin' door. Bad idea. You can dive under the couch and try to hide from it. Bad idea. What you should be doing is open up the door and say, hey, you got something to say to me? Let's learn from it.
You agree with that, Amy?
Oh, it's perfect.
No failure there from Daniel. Okay, good.
Yeah, no failure there. Dan
Good.
never fails, so I don't believe a word he says. But I do have to say, though, the regret of all the regrets types that you studied, the one that you said people were most consumed by was sort of the regrets of not trying. And I think that's very relevant to this. I forget what's the category?
Well, I mean, we have in the architecture of regret, there are regrets of action and regrets of inaction.
Right.
And one of the things that you see is that, especially over time, people regret what they didn't do more than what they did
Which
do.
are the
And
risks
a lot of
they
times
didn't take, right?
Yeah, and a lot of times we associate failure with trying something and having it go south on us. But there's a whole other category where we don't do things and we feel like a failure because of our inaction.
And I call those that stance or that attitude, that approach, that's playing not to lose rather than playing to win. And if you play not to lose, you're sort of holding yourself back because you're afraid of failure. And you may succeed in not losing, but you'll miss out on adventure and joy and stretching and accomplishing new things that end up being really fulfilling.
Well, and it gets to the word that you just used, which is risk. How much is that associated with what we're talking about here? Somebody that's careful and doesn't want to fail, and so they don't take any risks, and somebody who is willing to take the risks knowing that they may fail spectacularly even.
And it's not risk in terms of foolish risks, right? It's risks in terms of I'm willing to try something I haven't tried before because I think I'll learn something, or I think I'll be able to have an adventure I wouldn't otherwise have, or meet someone I wouldn't otherwise have met. So it's thoughtful risks.
Daniel Pink, I wonder, if as we start to hear from callers, if two of the biggest categories, or maybe most painful categories of failure, may either have to do with losing a job or a relationship, a divorce or something like that.
Yeah, and again, I forget, this is the lawyer in me coming out, because I'm answering every question with it depends, but it depends. So let's take losing a job. Sometimes losing a job is a failure. You have agency over that, and it's a failure because of your own lack of work ethic, your own lack of being attuned to what was really going on. Other times it's just that the company's in a downdraft and they have to get rid of people. So with failure, also with regret, you have to think about do you actually have agency? All right. So if it's raining outside, I can't regret that or feel like it's a failure on my part because I don't have agency over that. But if I see that it's raining outside and I go outside without an umbrella, I have agency over that. And that is a failure. The things about relationships are actually very, very interesting because there's a big difference between action and inaction. what you have in when I studied regret is huge numbers of regrets of people who drifted apart from someone they cared about and didn't reach out until it was, and sometimes it was too late. You have other instances where people actually got into a wrong relationship and maybe extracted themselves from it too late. Sometimes what they do is they find a silver lining. So I shouldn't have married Fred, but at least I have these two great kids. So they see a silver lining. They do what's called a downward counterfactual to make themselves feel better.
Well, and then it's about what they do afterwards. And Amy, let me just ask you, we heard from all those quotes from famous people, and I could have read many more talking about how it's all about the comeback and what you do after you fail. Explain that. Why is it about how you respond to failure that really matters?
Well, a failure, whether it's a kind of idiotic one or a really smart one, always has something to teach you. And so get your money's worth, right? You've already paid for it, so you might as well learn from it. So that's how you respond to it is that you take a cold, hard look at it and say, okay, where did I come up short? What should I have done differently? What can I take away from this? And more importantly, what do I try next? So otherwise, what's the point? Right?
Get your money's worth just reminded me of something I always think about when I order the wrong thing at a restaurant and I just don't want to eat it. And somebody said to me once, don't punish yourself twice.
Right,
just because you paid for it doesn't mean you have to eat it.
It's a small failure,
right?
But don't make it bigger.
It's a setback.
I mean, that's very Buddhist. I mean, it's the Buddhist concept of the second arrow. The first arrow is the thing that injures you, and the second arrow is how you respond to the first arrow.
Second dinner, more like.
Right. Well, Tolliver, plenty of figures in media and entertainment have spoken candidly about how their failures propelled them forward into future success.
Yeah, one of them is Ariana Huffington, who has had a very long career filled with successes and failures. Here she is speaking about the virtues of failure.
Failure is not the opposite of success. It's a stepping stone to success. But what makes it possible to accept that, is the fact that you have your own resilience, your own strength and peace and wisdom that you tap into so that you are not just dependent on the outside circumstances of your life.
Well, and of course, Ariana Huffington made, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars selling the Huffington Post. So I guess that would be considered a success, Tolliver, not a failure.
They say fail up.
Yes. Oh, boy. We'll be right back with your calls on The Middle.
Security program on spreadsheets, new regulations piling up, and audit dread? It's time for Vanta. Vanta automates security and compliance, brings evidence into one place, and cuts audit prep by 82%. Less manual work, clearer visibility, faster deals, zero chaos. Call it compliance or call it compliance. Get it? Join the 15,000 companies using Vanta to prove trust. Go to vanta.com/calm.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking you how you have come back from failure. Tolliver, what is the number to call in?
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com.
I'm joined by Amy Edmondson, professor of leadership at the Harvard Business School, and author and speaker Daniel Pink, and lots of callers. So let's get to Jonah in Appleton, Wisconsin. Jonah, how have you come back from failure?
Hey, thanks for having me on. Well, I had to learn about failure in middle school and high school because I had undiagnosed ADHD, and I did not understand why I couldn't remember what the teachers were saying, to the point where I would just tell teachers ahead of time that I had a hearing issue because I truly was like, why can't I remember what they said? I only got diagnosed at the end of high school, so my learning from failure started pretty early.
Well, and how did you come back from that? What would you say is the lesson from your experience?
The lesson would be tell your kids that it's not only okay to ask questions, it's like cool and smart. Like teenagers really need to know that it's a smart thing to ask questions. Just to go to your teachers and be like, hey, I know you're busy, but I'm really having a hard time remembering what you said. It's not you. I don't know what it is with me. But do you have 10 minutes at lunch after school. Just
Yeah.
that 10-minute chunk for me, with my math teachers especially, was very, very important and taught me never to be embarrassed to ask questions. And it's a skill that I use every day.
Yeah, a great point, Jonah. Thank you so much for that. Daniel Pink, what do you think about that? It is a real lesson for everybody just to ask questions, and that is a way to get beyond failure.
Yes, but it's not only on the individual. Like, we're putting a lot of the onus on the person, and the situation matters here too. And Amy has done decades of work on a concept called psychological safety, which is you have to, for students to be able to ask questions, or for kids to be able to ask questions in their family life, or for employees to be able to ask questions in the organization. There has to be a measure of psychological safety that says, hey, we're not going to demonize you for making mistakes. We're not going to demonize you for asking questions. And so it's a delicate dance between the onus on the individual, but also the context and the situation and the environment that they're in.
Mm-hmm. Amy, you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, I love how Jonah put it, which was you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. And really what he learned was you shouldn't be afraid to ask for help, and you should ask for it quickly. And Daniel is right. It is easier to do that if the environment, if the teacher, if the principals have said, we absolutely want you to reach out. When you're struggling, ask for help. We have resources, right? So setting the stage in that way ahead of time can help make that happen for people.
Let's go to Beth in Manchester, New Hampshire. Beth, what about you? How have you come back from failure?
Well, for me, I've learned that being willing to step up and take responsibility is huge. And that willingness comes from a place of not feeling that I'm bad or wrong. There's no judgment. It's just a willingness to look and to see where I can be responsible for what may have happened.
Yeah.
Is there something that you're thinking of specifically, Beth? Can you give us an example?
Recently, I was doing some work for a client, and I failed to do it correctly and had to go back and rework it. And I stepped up. I contacted the partner that I was working with and told him what had happened and explained, let him know that I was responsible for it, mm-hmm. and that here's what I'm going to do to correct it, and here's what I'm putting in to ensure that it doesn't happen going forward. So it really is, like, for me, I think of it as stepping out on a vista and looking to see, I can be responsible for this. I can be responsible for that. And just being with it rather than making myself wrong.
Mm. Beth, thank you very much for that. Daniel Pink, you're nodding along as she's talking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very wise approach to these kinds of dilemmas in life, and particularly at the level of even how she analyzed it. I mean, we all make mistakes, and you can say, I did a stupid thing, or you could say, I'm a bad person. I mean, shame, the feeling of shame is, I'm a bad person. That can be very, very debilitating. But if you just say, I did a bad thing, there was this one action was a mistake, this one action doesn't define me fully, it's just a moment of my life, not the full measure of my life, that is very psychologically healthy. The other thing that we have some evidence of this, I'm thinking of studies in like consumer behavior, where if you have a problem with a company, with a vendor, with a supplier, with a retailer, and you complain, and they fix it for you, you actually like them more than you did before the problem.
But they're also, I think, in my experience, unlikely to admit it when they did mess up. They'll usually, they don't, maybe for legal reasons, they don't want to say it.
Well, okay, so that's an interesting point. It's a very interesting point. So just two quick things, then we'll let Amy jump in here. So first of all, the way that we talk about failure, the way that corporations, big institutions talk about failure, is they use like incredibly inhuman language, like, we regret any inconvenience this caused you.
Right.
So, Jeremy, if I bumped into you and if I bumped into you and spilled coffee on you, I wouldn't say, "Oh, Jeremy, I regret any inconvenience I caused you." I would say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did that."
Right.
All right. That's one thing. The other thing is that the legal liability is a big deal, and there are suggestions out there that particularly for things like certain kinds of malpractice, certain kinds of medical mistakes, that if the doctor simply apologizes and says, I admit it, I'm sorry about that, then the plaintiff who's suing might not sue, but the lawyers don't want to do that because it's an admission.
Right.
And so our legal system is incompatible with how, in this case, with how human beings should operate.
Yeah. Amy?
Our legal system is incompatible in that sense with our psychology, right? Our psychology is dependent upon the relationship and the quality of the relationship. And when someone genuinely apologizes or genuinely notices and seems to care that they made a mistake or did something wrong, I think the research is clear. Like we like them better. We feel a tighter bond. We feel more connected to them than we did before. So I too, as Beth was talking, was thinking of the word wise and brave. And there's a certain way in which, Beth, your willingness to sort of take a look at it and say, okay, what happened? And almost with a touch of curiosity, like, what are the ways that I contributed to that, not just circumstances outside my control? And it shows to me a way of thinking that I like to say is thinking like a scientist, right? It's just data. And how do I take that data and put it to good use going forward?
Well, it makes me think of like one of the government agencies that I think I'm so proud of, which is the NTSB, which is that every time there's any kind of an airplane accident, they go and figure out how did this happen and how do we make sure that this particular thing never occurs again. And they actually have been incredibly successful at doing that over the years. Right. Lots of calls on the lines. Let's go to Daniel, who's in Kansas City, Missouri. Daniel, what about you? How have you come back from failure?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Jeremy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, awesome. I've experienced a lot of failure and come back from a lot of failure in my life, and it's certainly taught me a lot, and like how to face that and grow from it rather than run from it or not admit it. But what I was telling him beforehand that I'm in the middle of kind of like a regret quandary that I don't know what to do about, and I've had this great relationship that I'm in. We've lived together. It's been great. Like, we communicate well. It's wonderful. And there's this other person that's kind of come just in passing into my life. They're not anyone I'm close to. I just see them in passing, and I can tell that there's this connection that would be just magnetic and so interesting to like see if this is like an actual person that I should be in a relationship with, that I'm currently in a really happy, wonderful relationship, that I don't want to mess that up and have regret for leaving. I also don't want to have regret for the thing that I didn't do. Like you were talking about earlier, those are the things that eat away at you. And this person is just an eating away at me in the back of my mind, going like, wonder what her thing is. Wonder if that's actually like real, this connection that I'm feeling, because it seems like it every time we pass. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for calling in with that. Tolliver, I guess we'll call this Love Line now. But Daniel, thank you for that call. Amy, I mean,
I do
what do you
think
say?
that's a Daniel question.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, because of regret. Because Daniel's a regret expert.
Well, I mean, I have my namesake calling in from the
Midwest.
Exactly. Here's the thing. Okay, so I'm going to give my fellow Daniel, this piece of advice, which is to do a little bit of self-distancing. I think that one of my favorite decision-making technique when I'm stuck or when I want to give advice to other people is ask them, what would you tell your best friend to do? And so what I would ask Daniel in Kansas City is, what would you tell your best friend to do in this situation? And my guess is that Daniel in Kansas City knows, because Daniel in Washington, D.C. is studiously avoiding the answer.
Take yourself out of it and look at it from the outside. Yeah. Let's go to PJ in Ogden, Utah. PJ, what about you? How have you come back from failure?
Well, I think it's interesting that you talk about the medical profession. I'm a veterinarian, and so as a veterinarian, I'm very capable of saying I messed up, because, and it really does change your client perspective. But I failed my national entrance exam to be a veterinarian, so I had to take that twice. I've started a business and grown over 20 years of making so many mistakes, having no business education, just knowing that I had a dream. And so that just drives you, and you have to be humble. You have to apologize, and you have to learn from the mistakes you make. And I've just recently taken on orthopedic surgery, and taught myself. And that's a whole, I've screwed up. I have messed up and had to refer a case to another orthopedic surgeon because I really screwed it up. But since then, I have, come along and I've done multiple orthopedics and I've repaired them better now because of those mistakes that drive you to improving that investment and the care that you have in your life.
I'm glad you brought that up, PJ, because there's just so many people have experienced this in business and even especially in building a small business, which is very difficult to do. Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, I love this question and this story because it brings up the idea that there are bigger and smaller failures. Right? You could start a business and it fails. You try to get into veterinary school and you fail the entrance exam and you pick yourself up and you try again. And those feel pretty big, and they are, but you know what to do and you try again. And then there's just sort of the little day-to-day mistakes, the things that you misdiagnose that, in fact, maybe were quite puzzling and ambiguous. And so I sometimes find it helpful to distinguish between a failure, which is an undesired outcome. We all know what that means, but some of them are new and interesting and take us a step forward. Some of them are a result of we weren't paying attention, we weren't doing our best. Those, again, we should try to reduce to near zero. But mistake, technically a mistake is a deviation from existing knowledge or practice unintendedly. But an experiment, forcing yourself to try something new and to stretch your skills isn't a mistake, even if it ends in failure, right? It's a good idea. It's a good stretch. And it sounds to me like you have the right attitude toward both mistakes and failures and that recognition that you just have to keep trying and keep moving forward.
Tolliver, any failures writing in on listentothemiddle.com, or they just use the phone?
The way you phrase that, I got to tell you.
And they're failing to write in.
Anita says, I worked with nonprofits for over 3 decades. The federal government typically offered demonstration grants to try new programs or services to see if they work. Some of them don't and fail. However, this is considered valuable information. And then I'll do one more. So McDuffie in Georgia. McDuffie writes almost every week, so I want to shout out to you, McDuffie. He says, if I let fear from my failures keep me from trying to move ahead positively, then I doubt I would have ever had the chance to work in baseball broadcasting and many other wonderful things. So take it from me, failure isn't final.
All right. Let me get to one more call before we take a quick break here. David is in Gainesville, Florida. David, what about you? How have you come back from failure?
So my question, I actually have a question instead, and that has to do with, your upbringing. So if you have somebody who has a different type of upbringing, in my case, one emotionally immature parent, and how, in my world when I was a child, failure and being wrong were almost unanimous. If you made a mistake, it could sometimes result in an overreaction on behalf of a parent. And so that obviously, I'm finding out as an adult, that obviously affects how you view failures and also your hesitancy to try new things. And if that has anything to do with the way that you either of the guests' frameworks works as far as, viewing failure and regret. And
tough parenting, and then you're tough on yourself. Either you want to jump in on that?
Sure, I can give it a try. I think that most people have challenges to overcome, some more than others. And there's no question that some childhoods are really teaching the wrong lessons, right? Really teaching kids bad habits and wrong thoughts about cause and effect, and and teaching them that they're not good enough, or that if they get anything wrong, it's a disaster. And that's unhealthy and unwise. And I think by even the fact of your calling in and talking about this suggests to me that you've done a lot of thought and gone through a lot of growth and development, and you're trying very hard to develop healthy thinking habits and hopefully healthy parenting habits for your own kids, if you have any or plan to have any.
Yeah. Daniel?
I agree with that completely. I mean, there is a old advice for both for bosses and for parents is don't be the boss or the parent you had, be the boss or the parent you should have had. And so, be the parent you should have had. And also just, there's a large body of research in what's called self-compassion, which is treating yourself with kindness rather than contempt, not treating yourself better than anybody else, but not treating yourself worse than anybody else. And we know that is actually more effective than lacerating self-criticism and even patting yourself on the back with self-esteem.
The way I've heard it is give yourself some grace. I'm giving myself some grace over this. Okay. Tolliver, I always wonder when I see people who do tricks on their skateboards or their skis, how many times they've failed and how much it must have hurt when they did. But a lot of athletes have talked about failure in the context of sports.
Yeah, and also in the context of selling shoes. Listen to this 1997 Nike commercial featuring Michael Jordan.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
If I had a nickel for every shot that I missed in basketball, I might be as rich as Michael Jordan.
You see, I thought you were great at basketball this whole time.
No, I lasted 3 weeks in high school basketball, and then I realized it was not for me. We'll be right back with your calls coming up on The Middle. This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This hour we're asking you how you've come back from failure in your life. I'm joined by author and speaker Daniel Pink and Amy Edmondson, a professor of leadership at the Harvard Business School. You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can find us at listentothemiddle.com. Let's go back to the phones. And Julia in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Julia, what about you? Go ahead.
Hi. You can hear me all right?
Yep, we hear you. Go ahead.
So I'm currently in college, and I'm returning to college. I dropped out a few years ago, and part of the reason for that is because I haven't been very studious in my life, sitting down and doing the work myself, not just being taught it in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle to sit down and get myself to actually do the work. And coming back to college, I've decided this is something that I want to achieve. And so when I sit down, I'm actively kind of fighting that urge to stop. And it's still something I'm struggling with.
But you think you can do it this time?
Yeah, I'm taking it slow. I'm going part-time. And I just specifically the process of it. I just notice in my mindset, I'll notice thoughts pop up, and I will walk away from the book, right?
Yeah.
But maybe the next day or even the next week, I'll come back to it with a little bit more clarity about how my mind works and what's happening internally, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, yes, it does. And thank you. And I'm happy that you're giving it another chance. I think that's really great. Julia, thank you very much for that. Either of you want to jump in on that? I'm sure there are a lot of people in a very similar situation.
Yeah.
And we know so many people who've, stopped doing college or stopped doing something and they go back to it later.
I mean, first of all, it's the perfect setup, right? Julia's got a goal, and she's aware of that goal, and this time she wants to reach that goal, and she's aware that she's failed at it before. And Julia, you're being so self-aware about noticing yourself, getting bored or walking away from the book or finding it hard, and not wanting to do something hard, and then realizing, no, I do want to do something hard, and go back to it. Just keep on trying, keep on. And I think the more you do that, the longer the study periods will be, and the shorter the, forced breaks will be. And you'll build those muscles. You'll get stronger and stronger, and you'll get closer and closer to achieving that goal.
Yeah. I wonder, Daniel Pink, if part of the benefit of failing is realizing that you can't be perfect, that perfection is not the goal.
I think it's true. I think it's true for some people, and if perfection is your goal, then you're going to be disappointed, basically, throughout your life until you pass from this earth, because there's no way to be perfect. I think in some ways life is about choosing the imperfections you're willing to tolerate. And also to Julia, I mean, again, I just want Julia to treat herself with some degree of self-compassion. You know, if we were to say, if Julia wasn't talking about studying, which has a kind of moral valence to it, and instead was talking about running, and Julia said, I want to run a marathon. And, you know, we wouldn't say, okay, go out and run 26 miles right now, Julia. We would say, hey, run around the block. Great, you ran around the block today. 2 days later, run around 2 blocks. Now go half a mile. Now go a mile. And so she seems like what she's doing is very courageous and quite psychologically healthy.
Let me get to Brett, who's calling in from Verona, Wisconsin. Brett, what about you? How have you come back from failure?
Hey, Jeremy, great program. Appreciate it. I had to get to have my midlife crisis on the front page of the newspaper. I was in elected office. And, of course, you know, with the Internet, a lie can get around the world before the truth gets its socks on. And, you know, one of the things that I found was, you know, you got to hunker down, you know, when you're taking the missiles, but you just got to, you know, get up and dust off and start putting one foot in front of the other again. So it's just, but, you know, with social media out there, all these kids are just getting, you know, it's so much of their life, and I hate to see young kids taking their lives. You know, just remember you got your family, your friends, and keep on trucking. You know.
Did you get back into elected office, or have you gone into a different career?
Well, after I was set up by the local mayor, and he made false statements to the police, and you know, I was crucified on the front of the newspapers for like, you know, a month until the stories came out. But I ran for governor then of Wisconsin. I got 51,300 votes, and I was running against, you know, a sitting governor who's backed by billionaires, and now we've got a wide open seat. So I'm giving it another run.
You're
we'll
thinking
see if
about
it
it.
turns out, but well, I'm doing it. So it's like I'm painting the side of my van right now. Don't fret, vote for Brett. So
there we go. Okay, Brett, thank you for the call.
Are you want to use Jeremy's show to announce your candidacy?
Yeah, right. We need a last name, Brett.
Well,
right in the middle.
It's Hulsey, Hulsey, but
there we go.
Don't get me confused with Brett Favre.
No, right, exactly. If people were Googling Brett from Wisconsin, they might have done that. But you know, that brings up either of you the idea of somebody who's in the public eye and makes a mistake or fails in some way, and then has to deal with the ramifications from people who don't even know that person personally.
I mean, this does go back to what Daniel was talking about before, which is the best strategy in terms of what really does impress people and influence people is to own it, is to apologize for it, is to say what you're planning to do next, and, you know, come clean, be brave. And it's amazing to me how few people take advantage of the points that actually gives you.
And you could hear the emotion in his voice there
Sure.
as he was talking as well. Let's get to Molly in Concord, New Hampshire. Molly, what about you? How have you come back from failure?
Hi. So I am just getting out of a 9-year marriage, and, you know, for the first time looking at, I think it's a big failure. I think one of your examples, to really think, you know, you've made this choice of a partner that could be so wrong, you know, and that you could look at that in hindsight. But, you know, I felt like it's a new chapter, and I'm so happy to have fresh eyes that I'm looking at every new person that I meet with this new perspective of really understanding myself better, and enjoying the process of, you know, asking myself questions that really it's all about my own self-discovery, not necessarily about
What kind
finding
of
the right
questions are you
person.
asking yourself, Molly?
It's really simple. How do I feel? How do I react? What things come up as I'm encountering this scenario, and what that might say about what is underneath that. And so it really gives me such good information to think about things differently.
Thank you for that call, Molly. And Daniel Pinka, it brings me to a question I had, which is, what kind of questions should people ask when they fail? Should they ask themselves when they fail to make sure that they are able to bounce back from it?
I think one thing to really think about is how much of it is your responsibility. I don't want to let people off the hook, but I don't want people to feel a sense of blame for things that are about bad luck, about circumstance, and so forth. I think the two questions of what I would ask myself, one should ask themselves, in this particular case, or in any case, are, what lesson did I learn from this, and what am I going to do next? Okay, so you made a mistake because the you of 9 years ago married the wrong person. All right, so it's not the you of today. The you of today knows better, but the you of 9 years ago married the wrong person. What lesson did you learn from that bad decision, from that failure? And then also, what are you going to do about it next? And it could be that you look for someone who I don't know the facts of the situation, but you say, well, when I go out on a date or when I look for another partner, I'm going to look for somebody who is kind. I'm going to look for someone who asks questions. That you somehow you derive that from your previous mistake. So, what lesson did I learn from this, and what am I going to do next? I think those are the two key questions in overcoming failure and moving forward from it.
Yeah. Do you have anything that you want to add to that, Amy?
Yes. So I love that those were Daniel's two questions, because my one question precedes his two, which is what happened. Right. So it's sometimes just important to take that moment to reflect on in a cool-eyed, clear-eyed, compassionate way what happened right before, because then you are better positioned to learn the lessons and to answer the most important question, which is what now. And I do think the what now also it's helpful to reconnect yourself with your real goals today. Like what are you hoping for? What would you like to have and make happen in your life? And focus on that, using the lessons of this failure put it in quotes a little bit, because I agree, you can't have necessarily prevented this one, is what do you learn? What are you really trying to get for yourself now?
Right.
And what do you try next?
I think we have time for one more caller. Let me go to Bo, who's in Arvada, Colorado. Hi, Bo. What about you? How have you come back from failure? Hi.
So I suppose I have failed at just about everything in life, but I recognize, like the gentleman was saying, that that if you're trying to be perfect, you can't, and so that everything that I do, I could always do better, and so I don't have to be insecure about failing for anything, and I don't have to have an aversion to learning, because in doing it, I already have accepted that I could always do it better.
So, but you've gotten away from the idea of striving for perfection.
Oh, no, I'm still going to strive for it. And that's what allows me and motivates me to do the best that I can. To make that woodcut better, to be a better dog parent. My friend said it's not whether or not you make a mistake that matters, it's how you deal with it, because you're always going to. And so I don't have an insecurity or that aversion that some people do, where they don't accept their failure. Like you were talking about Trump earlier, like not acknowledging things. Like I just go ahead and acknowledge it, that anything that I do, I could always do better.
Yeah. Bo, thank you for that call. It reminds me actually of something I learned the other day as a dog parent myself, that I shouldn't be rushing Midas along when he's sniffing around, because that's really good for his brain. That's what he wants to be doing. It keeps him sharp. One of the things that, as I've listened to all these callers, and we've heard from young people, a person in college, we've heard from older people who are getting divorced, is there a difference between the way that you see, either of you, people in this country approaching failure depending on which generation they're from?
Ooh.
You're at Harvard, Amy, so are you are the students?
There's some, I don't have systematic data on this, but there is some sense that younger people are erring on the side of more perfectionism. Right? And that may be social media induced, it may be something else, but there is a greater or less comfort being wrong, right? Less comfort making mistakes, more perfectionism, and perfectionism is such a recipe for pain and disappointment. And we, really would like to spare them that. Yeah. I learned long ago from this wonderful psychiatrist named Maxie Maltzby, who was a kind of, just a great thinker about this stuff, that each and every one of us is a fallible human being, right? FHB, that's a given. The only question really is, are you okay with that, right? And if you're not okay with that, you're going to have an unhappier life than if you realize it's okay. I and everybody else here is a fallible human being, trying to learn, trying to do the best that we can.
Well, I failed to leave enough time to ask another question to Daniel Pink here, but we've run out. I want to thank my guests, Amy Edmondson, professor of leadership at Harvard Business School, and author and speaker, Daniel Pink. Thanks so much to both of you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Great to be here.
And if you like this show, subscribe to the podcast version of The Middle. Every week we include extra calls and conversations that don't make it into the broadcast.
Yeah, we call it the Too Hot for Tolliver segment, which is tough to beat. You can subscribe to our newsletter at listentothemiddle.com or on Substack.
The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Brandon Kondritz, and Marina Price. Our technical director is Steve Mork. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you next week.